I'd like to give a shout out to the JSConf organizers because this has been just an absolute dream. I've had the time of my life, and I've never felt this way before. It's so true. I owe it all to you. So, hi, I'm Jacob, and I'm here to talk to you all about community, about finding agency within your own communities, and about maintaining a service-oriented mindset in your community. I'm from Rockford, Illinois. For those of you who don't know, Rockford is about an hour and a half west of Chicago, which means that we're like an hour and a half from anything. We're an hour and a half from Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, Quad Cities, and it's an interesting place to be. I've got a 2-year-old, so that's a constant adventure in my life. I'm a recent homeowner. I do things outside of the JavaScript community and the development community because, don't we all? And I also happen to run a developer meetup group. In Rockford, there are about 150 developers. About half of those qualify under the general web technologies umbrella. So I can't really talk to you all about community without talking about my first community. Pictured here is my mom and my family. On her 65th birthday, we bought her 65 roses because it seemed like the sort of extravagant thing that my father would have done. He passed a couple of years ago. And when I was younger, he taught me all about being of service and doing small kindnesses for people without expecting anything in return, because that's just how we make our lives better. We improve our situation by impressing onto it the things that really make it great. So little things like holding doors for people and saying please and thank you. Like, you wouldn't believe how much that improves your life, right? And that service-oriented mindset really continues on today in doing things for my mother. When I was really young, I was raised Jewish, and my father taught me about, in Judaism we have these principles, these laws of tzedakah, which roughly translates to charity. But it's really about more than that. And there are 8 different levels, but the highest attainment is being able to serve somebody in order to give them the tools that they need to continue on serving themselves, making somebody self-reliant. And so that's really a principle that I've taken to heart in everything that I do. I can't really talk to you all about community without talking about a community I spend 40+ hours a week with. I work for a small marketing agency called Quiet Like Communications. We're 20 people strong, and 4 of us are devs. And we build client websites for food industry, or for B2, reset. We work in business to business within the food industry, mainly with food ingredients manufacturers, food equipment manufacturers, things like that. And so the devs at Quiet Light just build websites all day, and it's pretty great. Even though we build a product, we're still in a service-oriented industry where the client really comes first. As you can see, the place that I work really hires for culture. We like to do fun things in addition to really learning about our craft together. I can't really talk to you about community without telling you a little bit about the community that I live in. I really try and share my values about community in the place that I live, and I try to do so in running a meetup. Like I said, there are about 150 devs locally. At our meetup, we get between 10 and 15 on a good night. So if any of you out there run a meetup in a small town, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Rockford's an interesting place. It has a very proud past. It was a furniture manufacturing town, and then an industrial manufacturing town, and then a lot of nothing. And then over the last few decades, there's been a lot of racial and class segregation, which has just been expounded since the market collapsed in 2008. And as such, people are really apathetic. And it's really climbing uphill to get people to act. I put this slide up here, Taco Bell, Rockford's #1 Mexican restaurant, a little tongue-in-cheek, because I really do love the place that I live. This is not representative of the type of people that I try and surround myself with, which is really everybody I talk to, because everybody's got an interesting story to tell. But with such a social apathy, it's really hard sometimes. It's like climbing uphill, pulling teeth to get people to do anything. But I'm really here to talk about developers, 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 developers. You guys, you all. So that being said, how many meetup organizers do we have in the audience? Just so I can get a... Awesome. People sitting next to meetup organizers, turn to them and thank them because they do wonderful things for you. I also have to give a shout out to the ongoing Twitter battle between two people whose names I've totally forgotten that has resulted in a kamikaze karaoke competition between meetup organizers. That was fantastic. I'm glad I didn't go last night, so I have a voice today. Right here pictured is my co-organizer, Michael Hopkins. He also happens to be a co-worker of mine. You can follow him on Twitter here and totally surprise him because I didn't tell him his Twitter handle was going in this talk. He's really my better half, and if any of you have a co-organizer, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So really, what's a meetup? Really? You all are at JSConf, you should know this. A meetup is, for me, a place that I can have an outlet professionally, because when I talk to my non-dev friends about what I do, it's like talking to a brick wall. When I talk to other developers, they understand exactly what I'm talking about. When I said that script hung and it kept me there until 7 o'clock, and I really want to break something right now. You all know exactly what that's like. A meetup for me is a place where I can go and I can learn things from other people that know cool stuff and hopefully integrate that into my workflow. And it's a place where I can share some of the things that I've learned throughout my time programming. But what makes a good meetup? I would say that it's about the users, period. Any of you are a fan of satire and art, you might already know Jen. Jen Schiffer brings communities of art and code together in a really wonderful way, and a couple weeks ago was talking about our code being really ephemeral, and the thing that's important in a developer community is the people, not the code. The code just doesn't matter. So I would say success is really in the eye of the beholder. If you have happy people at your meetup, you're going to have a healthy meetup. So to that end, are your users staying engaged? That is really what matters most. So where do I fit into all of this? How did I come to run a meetup and try and organize communities? When I was a kid, I read a lot of sci-fi, and I dreamed of these gorgeous places, these utopian cities where everything was beautiful and like everybody had a place and it was all great. And then I grew up and I realized that maybe my expectations were a bit unrealistic, overinflated. And the takeaway from this is that just because not everybody doesn't abide by these same utopian ideals doesn't mean that I can't try and bring some of that to my day-to-day life. When I was younger, I played a lot of music, and in playing music, I learned a lot about patience for others, because everybody learns at a different pace, and everybody does things slightly differently. And just because it's a little bit different, some a little bit slower, some a little bit faster, that doesn't make it bad. That makes it, full of personality, right? Which is what we seek out of our communities. If everybody were the same, it'd be no fun. I learned a lot about collaboration when I played music, because I played in ensembles and orchestras. I played with my peers from the time I was like knee-high to a duck until I graduated high school. If any of you out there are musicians or otherwise collaborative artists, I hope all of you, now that you've seen Steve Kinney's talk, you can really appreciate where I'm coming from here. Some of you might say it's a little bit low-tech, but I would submit that most of the communities that we're a part of are not tech-focused. So this is really important everywhere. All of the communities that we're a part of, from our families to the people we might ride the bus with or share a car with, to our coworkers, regardless of whether they're devs or not, communication, community, patience for others, being of service to others, these are important things everywhere. When I got out of high school, I moved to Chicago, and I started working for this company called the Chicago Technology Cooperative, and I learned how to build websites for our clients, which were typically nonprofit organizations. One of my mentors that I met here by the name of David Eads, he also helped found a place called Free Geek Chicago. If any of you are familiar with the Free Geek organization, I heard a yes over there. It's a fantastic place. And Free Geek Chicago is an autonomous organization that takes its structure from what they call the mothership, Free Geek Portland, which was the original foundational place. But it's a place where everybody can go and they can learn how to tear apart a computer, how to rebuild a computer, how to install some software. And it's a really empowering place because it really serves a need in the community. There's a lot of people out there who just can't afford a computer. And so if they can go to this place and they can learn not just about computers, but about computing in a much larger sense, it's really an opportunity for them. And after, I think it is now 25 hours of service to this organization, they get to leave with a computer. So how cool is that? While I was there, I learned a lot about open source software and some of these open source ideals that I think we all tend to take for granted. I read this book called The Cathedral and the Bazaar. If some of you haven't read it, you really should, because it's incredible. It tells the story of how traditional software development kind of birthed the open source movement. It's written by a man named Eric Raymond, who's a self-described open source historian. And in it, Eric says that open source development breaks this bind, talking about the traditional roles that people inhabit in software development, making it easier for tester and developer to develop a shared representation to communicate effectively about it. This quote talks about open source development, but it's relevant to communication models in all communities. So to this, I would say, break down your predefined role definitions and serve in the capacity that you decide. If you want to teach something, teach something. If you want to learn something, learn something. If you want to participate, participate in whatever way fits you best, and do it to the best of your ability, because that's really where you shine. So given what you know about my background, I would say now that meetups are a wonderful way to learn. Meetups are an opportunity to teach. And meetups are a chance to become a better version of ourselves. A wonderful way to learn, an opportunity to teach, and a chance to become a better version of ourselves. Think about that. Sounds a lot like open source, but in the meat space. It's pretty cool. So, learning, we hope that's what the takeaway is. Every time I go to a meetup, I leave with something new, and that inspires me to continue going to the meetups because I learned something, and it's cool, and I get to integrate that into my life. Meetups for teaching, just because there's somebody talking about something at a meetup and that's like the focus of the meetup doesn't mean that you can't teach something even as somebody that is just there participating, because when you're sitting at a table and you're having a conversation with somebody, whether it's about the topic of the meetup that night or it's about whatever, chances are you're teaching them something, and chances are they're learning something from you. So I would say that teaching is really about being involved and about having a conversation. And who feels better after a meetup? I know, when I leave a meetup, I'm just jazzed about everything. And similarly with conferences, there's this great feeling after a conference when you're like, yeah, JavaScript, all the things, and then you go back to reality. But that doesn't mean that you didn't take something away from it and hopefully start to do something, maybe a little bit different, do something that you haven't done before, try something out, and just have fun with what you do because it's what you do. I think that self-improvement is really intrinsically motivating. So, what do you do every day? You sit on Stack Overflow, you consult the docs at MDN, you Google a lot of stuff. Hopefully you're on IRC doing more than just lurking. I'm totally guilty of that. I could make an entire presentation, way more than 30 minutes, with the list of resources that we have available to us online through this technology that we've created. The list really goes on and on and on. But wouldn't you rather talk about it in person? Wouldn't you rather hear how somebody used a certain tool than, oh, hey, that tool exists? I would say that our colleagues are our most valuable resource, and their experience is the most important thing that they have to offer. So remember before how we talked about user engagement. What do your users need? So I moved away from Rockford for a little bit, and then I moved back about 3.5 years ago, and I started going to meetups in the area. And at the time, we had a PHP meetup, we had a JavaScript meetup, there was a .NET meetup, a Cocoa meetup, a Linux meetup, and I tried to get to as many of those as possible, but I'm really going to focus on PHP and JavaScript because that's what I use. So I went to these PHP and JavaScript meetups, and they were struggling a little bit because in a town, as you can imagine, with 150 developers or so, and like half of them use web technologies, that's a pool of about 70 people to try and drag out every month. And not everybody has the time to do that. And at the time that I was starting to attend meetups in the Rockford area, the PHP group was really lagging behind. The organizer had gotten really busy with work and had moved out of town and really kind of just like left it up in the air. And there were maybe 3 to 5 people in average attendance. And the JavaScript group, well, JavaScript's a scary thing to some people. I don't know why, but it was similarly poorly attended. And at the JavaScript group, we happened to have this wonderful personality. I don't know if any of you know Corey Frang. You should also follow him. Corey is the kind of person that can like riff off the cuff about like anything JavaScript, and it will sound interesting and cool, and it will be engaging. And then Corey moved away. And so similarly, the JavaScript group was left without a leader. And so Michael, my co-organizer who I showed earlier, and myself, we kind of took on these two groups, and we decided that, hey, we really needed to combine our focus and our efforts because we would better serve our community if we had more resources at our disposal, i.e. each other. So meetups are really about doing what's best for your community. It's about sharing interest. There are overlaps in all programming technologies, and just because we're at a JavaScript conference doesn't mean I can't talk about PHP or .NET or whatever. I've talked to so many of you who use these technologies. Meetups are about professional networking and support. So now that we've qualified a meetup, how do we run one? So remember when I was talking about my co-organizer? I keep mentioning my co-organizer, this guy. Share the load if you can. Another perspective and another set of hands can really help. A lot of meetup organizers I talk to actually have anywhere from 3 to 5 people that kind of take up this mantle of bringing good meetup content to the area. And the more people you have, the more you can share the load, and the more consistent your meetup will be as a result. And people love consistency. To run a meetup, you need a code of conduct. You all had better know what this is because you agreed to one in attending today. So in talking with David Eads, a mentor that I had mentioned before, so when he was organizing Free Geek Chicago, for a while they ran without a code of conduct, and there were situations in which people felt unsafe and they decided that they couldn't come back because they just didn't have any guarantees that they would be safe there. So a code of conduct is really about solving that problem. It's about defining harassment explicitly and defining consequences for harassment explicitly, because people are going to be people, and not everybody knows how to act right. After implementing a code of conduct at Free Geek Chicago, there were many, many more situations, obviously, where personalities conflicted, and people were able to learn how to act properly among each other and maintain their presence in that space. Because, again, even if somebody doesn't know how to act right, doesn't mean they don't have something valuable to contribute. So we really want to avoid that problem. And really, nobody is above reproach. So this is a really necessary thing. To lead a meetup, you need space. No, this kind of space. You need a table and chairs. You need, hopefully, a projector if you've got more than a couple people to be able to share what you're talking about. Some pizza really helps. Personally, we have a space that's sponsored by a business that some of our attendees are a part of, and that's wonderful. If you can get a business to sponsor your meetup, most businesses have conference rooms with things like a table and chairs and projectors, and some of them might even be willing to sponsor some pizza. If you don't have an opportunity for that, I would suggest contacting local universities or colleges if you have any nearby, because they love learning opportunities. That's what they're about, right? And chances are they'll give you plenty of free advice, and they will spread your name like wildfire. And hopefully with students attending universities and colleges, you'll get a couple more people. Also, I would say that if you're small enough, a coffee shop or a brewery or whatever happens to work, go with that, because you do need a space. But as you grow, you will notice that you will need a more defined, intentional space for this. I would say you also need internet. I mean, how many times have you gone to a conference or a meetup and the internet is just crap? And you notice it right away. It's the first thing you notice, because you pull out your laptops or your phone and you're like, what? But when it works, and it's great. So have internet at your meetup. I would say that you need some tools. Specifically, shared calendars and documents are wonderful. When you're running a meetup and you're trying to have some consistency, it's nice to schedule things out, maybe. If you're writing a code of conduct, it's nice to be able to collaborate on that. You also should probably use some social media. We build these tools where we can type something in or take a picture or whatever and blast it out to hundreds and thousands of people. And so use that to your advantage. Don't be afraid to go old school, though, because email lists are something that a lot of people appreciate. I know when I say, okay, I'm going to go to this meetup, I appreciate getting an email with the iCal attachment and putting it on my calendar. Then it's everywhere. So don't discount the older technologies. Personally, we use meetup.com because, again, it's a business-sponsored solution. It's free to a certain point, but the paid version does extra stuff, I think. It's by no means an end-all, be-all solution, but it does a lot of these things pretty well, and it works for me. So take that with a grain of salt. There might be some potential detractors, like I've heard some negativity about recruiters finding out about meetups and then coming to suck the life out of your meetup, because recruiters don't really seek to contribute. They just want to pull resource, right? And you ideally don't want that at your meetup. So in keeping it going, remember to focus on your users. It's all about the users, all the time. If you're serving your users, if you're engaging your users, if you're keeping them happy, they will keep coming back. They will bring people back, and your meetup will grow. And don't be afraid to do something different. Our industry is no stranger to this concept of pivoting, some of us in the most radical, obscene ways. And this is really about a tactic for topics, not the entirety of a meetup. I wouldn't suggest pivoting from JavaScript to Fortran. It might not work. But for a while, Michael and I were coming up with, after we had combined efforts, we were coming up with topics, and after a couple months, that gets exhausting. It's really difficult to come up with content month after month after month, and that's not to say that we hadn't accomplished anything that month, but we're busy people. We have lives outside of this tech stuff, and we want to be able to participate in them. So we started doing these Geek Dinners, and it was fantastic for a little while because everybody was like, hey, let's go to this brewery and we'll eat some good food and drink some good beer and it'll be great. It'll be awesome. And then after a few months of that, we kind of got in a rut and realized that it wasn't working. So don't do that. Maybe once a year, twice at max. But I would schedule it separately from the traditional meetup format, because people don't want to go to a meetup to just go to dinner with a bunch of people. It's cool to talk shop every once in a while, but people really crave new things at a meetup. People really crave ideas, and when you're talking about technology in specific ways, those ideas tend to flow. So I think our last Geek Dinner was 3 people showed up. It was abysmal. It was really terrible. And this was after we had gone through all the effort of combining our 2 meetups to this Rockford Web Devs thing, and we were starting to re-engage people, and it was going really well, and it felt like we had fallen off of a cliff. Excuse me. So then we decided that we were going to build something collaboratively as a group. We put it up on GitHub. It's at github.com/rockfordweb/pastebin2, I think. They wanted to name it v7_final --, but that fell through. So over the course of 6 or 7 months, we collaboratively built a Pastebin clone. And we basically just went to the group, and every other month, Michael and I would switch off coding while we solicited input from everybody. We were like, so we want to build this thing. What would be the first step? And we went through this whole creative process together, taking input so that everybody felt like they had something to offer. They felt like they were engaged by this process, and they really contributed. Some of them even contributed after hours and made commits to the GitHub, which was great. That's what it's for. So through this project, we've essentially tripled our engagement. For us, that means we're up to a steady 12 to 15, on a good night, 20, 25. But when you think about that in terms of the overall community size, talking about a pool of 70 web technologies developers, that is pretty fantastic. It has been for us anyway. So really don't be afraid to do something different. And I would say also that you should use your resources at hand. And by this I mean human resources, from the most personal, the ones you're in contact with every day, to those that are semi-local, regional, or even if you're at Java or JSConf and you're like, hey, would you maybe want to talk at my meetup? And somebody might say yes. You never know. I would say talk to your friends. Be like, hey, I know you're not really into this whole development thing, but could you show up? Because having warm bodies in the room means that people will perceive it as being a successful thing where people share and integrate. And it works, for a little bit while, it really helps to boost attendance. And they might learn something. I hope they would. Don't be afraid to talk to your coworkers and say, hey, there's this meetup thing that I'm doing, and you should really come because it's totally relevant to what we do every day. But do that with some caution, because remember that not everybody has time to commit to a meetup, and that's okay. So don't harass them about it, please. Talk to your fellow meetup attendees. If you see somebody that's there week or month after month and they just sit and patiently observe, ask them if they would like to share something that they've learned. I know that for me, when I am in that mode where I'm just observing, I don't often think that I have something relevant to contribute, but things that might seem totally mundane to me are maybe mind-blowing to the rest of you, and vice versa. That's how this community works. So if you help somebody else get out of their shell, they will repay you with the most amazing talk you've ever heard. Don't be afraid to go to regional meetups. It's not too big of a deal for a lot of people to jump in the car, drive an hour, hour and a half. If you don't have access to a car, don't feel bad about that. But if you look within a 50-mile radius of where you're at, chances are there's other meetups around. And even if they're not directly related to the technology stack that you happen to be a super big fan of, chances are you'll learn something there. And at those places, you can interact with people who might be able to bring something back to your meetup and say, hey, check this out. You come and visit us. Maybe share something. I have to give a shout out to the Madison PHP user group, who has been especially helpful to us. Yeah, they've been great. And most importantly, I mean this to say, be of service to each other. This particular phrase, be excellent to each other, has had some terrible failings in our industry, unfortunately, hence the talk about codes of conduct and why that's important. But if you maintain a service-oriented mindset, then that's really what it's about. We're here to help each other. It's how we grow. It's how we learn. So I really hope I've helped to impart a thing or two about community here today. Remember to be of service to your users. Above all, without users, there is no meetup, period. So do what they want, to a point. Know that you have complete control over your participation. I was talking about open source software, redefining role definitions. Really do what you want within the realm that you want. Do your best at it, and it will be a wonderful thing. And don't be afraid to do something drastically different. The results will surprise you. Thank you.